At the annual Carter family reunion, my Aunt Gloria slowly pushed herself up from her favorite lawn chair, the one with the faded floral cushion she'd had since the 90s, and pointed right at me. Her voice sliced through the warm summer air, sharp and deliberate, loud enough to hush the soft hum of backyard conversations. Next time, Danielle, do us all a favor and don't bring your fatherless kid along. For a split second, time seemed to hold its breath. Then it came. The laughter. Not the quick, awkward kind that dies in people's throats. No. This was the kind that spread like a brush fire, catching on faces too embarrassed to stay neutral. People chuckling because silence would have been too confrontational. Some relatives exchanged side glances, their laughter laced with discomfort. Others, like Uncle Chuck and his crew by the grill, leaned into it, fully slapping knees and shaking their heads like it was the funniest thing they'd heard all day. I sat there frozen, the weight of her words pressing on my chest. My gaze shifted instinctively to my son Miles. He was standing near the old igloo cooler, one hand wrapped around a cold soda can he hadn't opened. 15 years old, taller than I'd ever imagined he'd grow, standing in the middle of that backyard like a lighthouse in a storm. His expression didn't flinch. No anger flickered across his features. No sadness clouded his eyes. He was just still, quiet, like he'd learned long ago how to armor himself in silence. He didn't say a word, neither did I. God knows I wanted to. I wanted to stand up and fire back, defend my boy, defend myself. But the words sharp ready clogged my throat. I took a slow breath, inhaling the scent of barbecue and cut grass, and swallowed every syllable that tried to climb out. The night didn't pause for us. People returned to their potato salad, and cornbread laughter found new targets. Small talk resurfaced like nothing had happened. The music shifted to a soulful old-school track. Aunt Gloria went back to holding court at her table, and the evening carried on, dragging us with it. But as the sky deepened into that inky blue of late evening, something happened. When the check came, an oversized folder delivered by a young waitress from the local catering joint, Miles stood up. Not rushed, not dramatic, just stood. His voice was smooth, calm as a lake at dawn. "It's already taken care of," he said, scanning the crowd with eyes that had seen more than they should at 15. "And so is your mortgage." It was like a switch flipped. Every conversation, every fork scraping against paper plates, every rustle of napkins ceased in an instant. The backyard went still. The only sounds left were the soft clink of ice in glasses and the distant buzz of cicadas. All eyes were on him. On us. I hadn't set foot at a family reunion in 6 long years. Not since the last time when Lisa's husband, drunk and sloppy, muttered to my face that my son was one big accident I should have fixed. That night I gathered my things, gathered my son, and left without looking back. Swore I wouldn't come back. But this year Miles had asked me to reconsider. His voice was low but steady as we rinsed dinner dishes in our small kitchen. "Come on, Mom. You don't have to play nice. Just be there for you, not for them. And when Miles asks for something, I listen." Because behind his calm words was a need I couldn't ignore. A need for me to be seen. He's not a little boy anymore, though. Sometimes I ache for the days when he was. Now he stands taller than me, his voice deeper than the radio hosts he listens to. He carries himself with a kind of quiet weight, like a kid who had to grow up while I was too busy surviving. Yet when we're home just us, he still calls me Mama like he did when he was 5. Those small mercies mean everything. His father left when Miles was 4, said he needed space on a Tuesday, blocked us on Wednesday. No child support, no calls, not even a postcard on his birthday. The ache of that betrayal was sharp, but over time it dulled into a bruise I learned to live with. A broken man can't build a family, so I did it myself. I juggled shifts as a nursing assistant by day and cleaned office buildings by night. Weekends were for baking pound cakes and sweet potato pies, selling them to neighbors who'd become our extended family in every way that mattered. Some months, $50 had to stretch like magic. Some nights I'd bury my face in my pillow, stifling the sobs so my boy wouldn't hear. But children know. They always know. Still, I never let my struggle become his story. Miles kept his grades up, taught himself coding through free online courses, helped Miss Eleanor down the block with her yard work. He never asked for much. But when he asked me to show up for this reunion, I knew what it meant. He wanted me to walk in, not as the girl who got pregnant too young, but as Danielle Carter, the woman who made it work. That morning, as we were heading out, Miles stood in the doorway holding my favorite necklace, the delicate gold chain I almost left behind. "You forgot this," he said, his fingers brushing the back of my neck as he clasped it on. His hands, steady and sure, belied his years. "Looks good," I smiled, adjusting his crisp button-up. "You clean up nice." His lips twitched into a half-smile. "I got your back, Ma." In that quiet moment, I didn't realize how much I needed those words. We drove across town in my old Toyota Corolla, its paint chipped from years of faithful service windows down, and a soft playlist of soulful R&B filling the silence. Miles had chosen the tracks no loud bass, just smooth melodies and soft percussion. He didn't say much, and neither did I, but the silence between us felt okay, like we were gathering ourselves before stepping onto a stage neither of us had auditioned for. Aunt Gloria's backyard was exactly as I remembered: mismatched folding chairs, plastic tablecloths with gaudy floral prints, and that same beat-up stereo blaring 90s hits. The air was thick with grill smoke and the sugary scent of melting popsicles. Kids dashed between tables, their mouths stained cherry red, while adults clustered in familiar cliques. A few relatives waved with stiff politeness. Some offered those obligatory hugs that feel more like press releases. Miles kept close, his sharp eyes scanning every face like a detective in training. He felt it too, the undercurrent of judgment wrapped in sweet smiles, the small talk that was really just veiled landmines. From across the yard, Aunt Gloria spotted us. Her face didn't shift. No smile, no nod. Just one perfectly arched eyebrow before she turned back to her conversation, dismissing us as unworthy of her attention. That was her way, always holding court, always deciding who mattered. Determined to stay afloat, I played the part. I complimented someone's new hair color, helped Lisa's daughter carry trays of lemonade, even chuckled at Uncle Chuck's worn-out football jokes. But the whole time, I felt like a trespasser in my own bloodline. Miles, ever composed, handled the interactions with grace. He answered questions, smiled sparingly, kept his responses polite but distant. He knew better than most what people say when they think the target isn't listening. As we sat down to eat, he leaned in close, his voice a low murmur. "You holding up okay?" I nodded, grateful for the check-in. "You." His lips barely moved, but his words carried weight. "Yeah, just watching." Under the table, I squeezed his hand. That small gesture was my anchor in a sea of forced civility. I felt a swell of pride, not just for him, but for the journey that had brought us here, for the battles we'd fought, the quiet victories we claimed in silence. But what I didn't know then was that a storm was brewing, and this time the blow wouldn't come from whispers behind my back. It would come straight to my face. And my son, he was more ready than I ever could have imagined. The sun had begun its slow descent, spilling long amber streaks across Aunt Gloria Thompson's backyard, draping the folding tables and cracked patio stones in a honeyed glow. Shadows stretched lazily beneath the maple trees, while the air grew thick with the mingled scents of charcoal smoke and sweet iced tea. Children, their laughter shrill and unburdened, darted across the yard, gleefully ambushing each other with plastic water guns, oblivious to the undercurrents swirling just beneath the adult conversations. Clustered near the grill, the older men were locked in a familiar half-playful, half-serious debate about football, a cyclical argument as worn as the folding chairs they sat in. Their voices rose in overlapping waves, seasoned with good-natured ribbing and the occasional belly laugh that echoed beneath the rustling leaves. And there she sat, Aunt Gloria, perched at the end of the long, folding table, like a monarch presiding over a kingdom built of paper plates and polite pretenses. She never sat in the middle. No, the head of the table was her throne, a vantage point from which she could survey her domain with imperious detachment. One by one, family members drifted toward her orbit, bending subtly in her direction, seeking her approval, or at the very least, her tolerance. Miles and I quietly claimed 2 seats near the table's fringe, intentionally removed from the epicenter of her influence. Our plates were a modest collection of reunion staples, sticky ribs glistening under the sun, a mound of coleslaw wilting slightly in the heat, and macaroni that bore the unmistakable bite of a heavy-handed salt shaker. We ate in measured silence, the kind that clings not out of awkwardness, but from the shared understanding that words were unnecessary. Though his head remained bowed, Miles's eyes were anything but idle. They moved with a quiet vigilance, cataloging every glance, every murmur, every smirk disguised as small talk. Relatives approached with casual offerings of conversation, thinly veiled as connection, but reeking of superficiality. "Man, Miles, you shot up this year, you hoopin'." Yet one cousin grinned his words laden with assumptions. Miles responded with a polite, close-lipped smile, his shoulders squared but relaxed. Another relative, a woman whose name I barely remembered, remarked with forced cheer, "You really are his twin," her gaze flickering briefly to me before darting away, the unspoken reference to Miles's absent father, hanging in the air like humidity. I laughed habitually now. That smooth, non-committal laugh I'd perfected over years of side comments and thinly veiled jabs. It filled the space without inviting further conversation. We were nearing the end of our meal plates, dotted with remnants, when the moment arrived, a moment so sharp it carved itself into memory with surgical precision. Aunt Gloria rose slow and deliberate, balancing a paper plate heaped with banana pudding. She sauntered toward our table, each step measured as if choreographed for maximum impact. Stopping beside us, she spooned a bite into her mouth, savoring it before fixing her gaze on me. Her voice, though, wrapped in the casual tone of idle chatter, carried with it the weight of years of condescension. "You know, Danielle," she began each syllable as deliberate as the slow scrape of a knife across porcelain. "I just don't understand why you keep bringing your fatherless boy to these gatherings." The words landed with a quiet brutality. The shift in the yard was almost cinematic, a ripple, not a crash. Conversations faltered, then fell silent one by one like dominoes tipping into stillness. Heads turned slowly reluctant, but compelled as her statement unfurled its cruelty across the lawn. And yet she smiled, that same lacquered grin, chewing calmly, as if she'd merely commented on the weather. "This is a family reunion," she continued, voice lilting with mockery. "Maybe next time you come by yourself, spare us the spectacle." A smattering of laughter followed, sharp and brittle. Some covered their mouths as if that might soften their complicity. Others averted their eyes, busying themselves with imaginary tasks. No one intervened. No one challenged her. I sat motionless, a storm of responses swirling behind my ribs, but my body betrayed me. My fork slipped from my fingers, clattering against the flimsy plate, the sound far too loud in the tense hush. My eyes sought hers, searching desperately for a flicker of irony, a hint that this was some poorly executed joke. But Aunt Gloria's gaze was steady, unrepentant. She meant every word. My instinct was to rise, to defend, to unleash years of carefully swallowed retorts. But my throat-constricted words tangled in the web of pride and pain. My heartbeat roared in my ears, drowning out the whispers that had already begun to circle us. And still Miles remained still. Back straight, hands resting loosely on his lap, his face a serene mask. Yet I saw it, the flicker behind his eyes. A spark, subtle but unmistakable, igniting quietly beneath his calm exterior. He said nothing. Not yet. Finally, summoning a fragile thread of composure, I managed. "He's here because he's family, just like everyone else." Gloria's snort was a dismissal as she turned away, resuming her place at the table with a self-satisfied air, as if she had simply righted a social imbalance. Miles rose. For a breathless moment I feared he would walk away, and with every fiber of my being, I was ready to follow. But instead he veered toward the porch, settling himself on the top step alone, but not retreating. I remained seated, paralyzed by the weight of what had just transpired, before finally pushing myself to my feet and crossing the yard to join him. We sat side by side, the distance between us not measured in inches, but in shared silence. "You okay?" I asked, my voice brittle. He nodded. "Yeah." She was out of line. His response was soft, almost indifferent. She always is. I glanced at his hands folded neatly in his lap, though his knuckles were pale from the quiet tension in his grip. He wasn't as untouched as he appeared. "She doesn't matter," I whispered more to myself than to him. But he cut through my words with a gentle firmness. "She said it to make you feel small, not me." That truth hit with the force of a freight train. At 15, my son had dissected the moment with a clarity I had failed to muster. Gloria's attack had never truly been aimed at him. It was a performance, a public shaming designed to remind me of my place, her way of shrinking me back into the shadow of my past mistakes. But Miles had seen it all. The yard around us slowly reanimated. Conversations resumed, music swelled, children squealed beneath the spray of a garden hose. For them, the moment had passed. For us, it lingered an invisible fracture beneath the surface. The night carried on with an almost frantic normalcy, but I felt dislodged as though Miles and I were spectators at a play whose actors refused to acknowledge the script had changed. Part of me longed to leave to gather my things and retreat as I had before. My eyes flitted to my purse, to the car keys, then back to Miles. He sat unmoving, his stillness a quiet defiance. "You want to go?" he asked, his tone offering me an easy exit. My instinct was to say yes, but something in his composure tethered me to that spot. His calm was not born of defeat, but of strategy. He had seen the battle lines long before I had. "No," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Not this time." He nodded as if my answer had been inevitable. We returned to the main tables, rejoining the performance with the quiet resolve of survivors. Miles drifted to the dessert table, poured himself a glass of lemonade, selected one of the cupcakes I had baked the night before, and returned to his seat without fanfare. The air seemed to shift subtly. No one approached him. No one dared reignite what had simmered beneath the surface. I watched Gloria, still ensconced in conversation, her laughter sharp and brittle. The same voice that had once reprimanded me for chewing gum in her pristine living room, that had accused me of talking too much for a girl with nothing to show for it. Miles returned, leaned in, and with a conspiratorial murmur said, "You know she's got a mortgage problem, right?" I blinked, blindsided. "What?" "Reverse mortgage. Took it out last year. She's behind. Cousin Lisa was talking about it with Uncle Chuck a while back. She's keeping it quiet, but they're scrambling." His words sank in, rippling through my shock. That he had heard this, remembered this, puzzled me more than the revelation itself. "Why would you remember that?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He shrugged his eyes, never leaving Gloria's oblivious form. "Because she looks down on people, but she's drowning too." In that moment, I realized the depth of his observation, the maturity that had quietly blossomed beneath my own worries. "I started saving," he continued, his tone measured. "From that app project I did with the tech mentoring program. Been helping Miss Eleanor with her bills, but I kept some aside, just in case." My breath hitched. In case of what? In case we needed to walk in somewhere and show them who we really are. For a heartbeat, I forgot how to breathe. His words weren't boastful, they were declarative, a quiet certainty from a boy who had decided long ago that dignity was not granted. It was claimed. "You're 15, I whispered. "I'm ready," he replied. Miles's voice did not waver. Not even a tremor of doubt colored his tone. His spine remained unbent, his posture a quiet testament to a decision long since made. He wasn't performing for me. He wasn't seeking approval, nor was he chasing some adolescent fantasy of validation. The resolve etched into his young face told me everything I needed to know. Miles had already done the math, weighed the cost, and chosen his moment. I had always known my son was good with his hands, good with his mind. Since the age of 12, he'd been piecing together websites, tinkering with digital frameworks, teaching himself the intricacies of code, while other kids scrolled mindlessly through feeds. He had crafted small tools, neat little apps that served real people, some of which had even slipped into the world and quietly earned him money. But the depth of his ambition, the foresight, the deliberate patience with which he'd mapped out his path, that part had eluded me. Until now, I sat momentarily suspended in the gravity of his revelation. Not stunned by the fact that he could, but by how firmly he had decided he would. "You don't owe her anything," I whispered, my voice laced with the weariness of years spent untangling the barbed wires of family politics. His reply was immediate, soft but unyielding. "I know, but this isn't for her." That line, so simple, so final, lodged itself in my chest, refusing to dislodge. Miles was not chasing redemption from Gloria Thompson. He was not here to negotiate peace with a woman who had long since dismissed him. No, he was enacting a truth far more profound, that dignity is not granted by the perceptions of others, but cultivated through the quiet, unremarkable acts no one expects of you. Acts that do not seek applause. And so we stayed. We remained at that table, smiled when appropriate, blended into the familial murmurings with the practiced grace of people who knew how to be invisible when necessary. But beneath our stillness, something pulsed, a slow, deliberate heartbeat. Something was coming. And for the first time I found that I wasn't afraid. Because Miles had already chosen how the night would end. As the last hues of daylight bled into dusk, the backyard transformed under the soft glow of string lights draped haphazardly across fence posts and tree limbs. The children had retreated indoors, leaving behind a battlefield of trampled grass and forgotten toys. The adults, meanwhile, settled deeper into their drinks, their conversations mellowed by alcohol and the comforting hum of shared nostalgia. Miles remained near me not with the jittery clinging of a boy seeking refuge, but with the calm vigilance of a young man who knew when to hold his ground. Occasionally his gaze would flick toward Gloria's table, where she reclined with the practiced ease of a woman who believed the earlier scene had cemented her dominion. Her laughter rose sharp and brittle, clinking against the soft edges of the evening like ice in a glass. And then the moment arrived. The server from the catering company returned bill folder in hand, a subtle shift rippling through the air. This was the ritual climax of every reunion, the dance of who would pay, who would pretend, who would hesitate just long enough to shame another into offering. Gloria always took the lead, wielding the bill like a scepter, a final affirmation of her status. She stood slowly, lifting the paper with a theatrical flourish. "All right, y'all," she called out, her voice rising above the ambient chatter. "Time to cough it up. We're all kinfolk until the check comes, huh?" Predictable laughter followed, hollow and performative. The usual chorus of groans, uncles fishing out crumpled bills with the exaggerated reluctance of seasoned actors. But this time the script was about to change. From the corner of my eye, I saw Miles push back his chair. There was no urgency in his movement, no grand gesture to announce his intention. Yet as he stepped forward, the shift was palpable. The conversations dwindled, faces turned curiosity, piqued by the quiet command of his stride. He stopped directly in front of Gloria, his presence cutting through the scene with surgical precision. "You don't have to split it," he said, voice clear, resonant, but without an ounce of bravado. "It's already paid for." For a breathless moment the yard seemed to exhale. Gloria blinked, confusion creasing her carefully maintained composure. "What do you mean it's paid for?" she asked, attempting a dismissive chuckle. Without hesitation, Miles reached into the inner pocket of his jacket, producing a neatly folded receipt. He extended it to her, steady, unhurried. "Paid in full," he said, "tip included." The paper trembled slightly in Gloria's grasp as she scanned its contents. Her lips parted. By who, she demanded, though the answer was already apparent. "I did." The silence that followed was not empty. It was dense, weighted with disbelief, laced with the crackling energy of an unspoken reckoning. Cousins leaned in, uncles adjusted their glasses as if proximity would clarify what they had just witnessed. Gloria's laugh was brittle, desperate. "You're 15. What kind of allowance you getting, boy?" "I don't get an allowance," Miles replied, his tone devoid of condescension. "I built an app last year, helped small businesses manage their inventory. Some folks liked it enough to pay me for custom versions. I've been saving." He turned slightly, ensuring every ear caught his next words. "I paid for this dinner, and I also made a payment toward your mortgage." The gasp that rippled through the crowd was not loud, but its impact was seismic. Gloria's fingers faltered as she folded the receipt, her earlier bravado visibly eroding. "I know you've been behind," Miles continued, his voice a gentle, unrelenting current. "I don't know all the details, but I heard about the reverse mortgage. Heard you were close to losing the house." He paused, allowing the truth to settle. No one should lose their home. Not even someone who looks down on others. There was no smirk on his lips, no triumph gleaming in his eyes. He wasn't there to humiliate her. He was simply presenting the facts, uncloaked, undeniable. The ensuing silence was not awkward. It was reverent. The kind of hush that falls when something sacred, something true has been laid bare. I watched as Gloria's gaze darted desperately from face to face, searching for rescue, for someone to intervene, to prop her back up on the pedestal she had so long occupied. But no one moved. Not a hand was raised. Not a voice came to her defense. And no applause either. This was not a moment for clapping. This was a moment for seeing. Without further word, Miles turned and walked back toward me, his shoulders square, his hands tucked casually into his pockets. As he passed, I reached out, fingers brushing his arm, a silent gesture, a tether of gratitude when words failed me. He sat once more as if nothing extraordinary had occurred. Around us the murmurs began, but it wasn't gossip that filled the air. It was awe. Cousin Emily leaned over, her eyes wide, mouthing, "Did he really?" I answered with a simple nod, my throat too tight for speech. Gloria did not speak again that night. She sat, arms folded, her silence louder than any retort. She didn't thank him. She didn't apologize. But the sharpness in her gaze had dulled. For the first time in my life, Gloria Thompson looked small. Miles had not done it for accolades. He had not done it for revenge. He had done it because he understood perhaps better than anyone present that respect is not seized with volume. It is earned quietly through action. The rest of the evening unfolded as if through a slow, deliberate haze. Conversations resumed softer now. Glances were cast with newfound respect or carefully avoided altogether. Gloria remained seated, anchored by her own silence. We didn't linger much longer. I busied myself helping clear tables, gathering discarded cups, folding chairs. Miles volunteered to take out the trash, his movements as unassuming as they were deliberate. As we gathered our things, Emily caught my arm in a brief, tight hug. I should have said something when she came for you like that. I'm sorry. It's okay, I said, not to comfort her, but because I had long since relinquished the need for apologies from those who found their voices, only after the moment had passed. The ride home was quiet. I half expected Miles to unpack it all to explain his thoughts, his motives. But he simply leaned back against the seat, buckled in, and gazed out the window as the town slipped past us. Halfway home, I broke the silence. You didn't have to do that. I know. You really didn't owe her anything. I didn't do it for her. I glanced over, studying his profile, the boy I raised, the man he was becoming. Beneath his calm was the weight of the evening, the effort it took to hold steady, to rise without fanfare. So why, I asked, my voice barely audible. He considered this, then answered simply, because you never let her define you. And I needed her to see that. Emotion welled up, unbidden. My hands tightened around the wheel, my vision blurred momentarily. I nodded because if I spoke, I would unravel. The boy I raised had become the man I had prayed for. When we reached home, words felt unnecessary. I kicked off my shoes. Miles headed straight to his room. At the threshold, he paused, looking back at me. I meant it when I said I got your back. I smiled then, softly, quietly, the kind of smile that blooms not from amusement, but from a place far deeper where pride and heartache weave together into something bittersweet. I know, I whispered, though I wasn't sure if Miles even heard me as he closed his bedroom door with the gentle click of finality. And yet long after that door had shut, I remained standing in the narrow hallway, the dim glow of the evening's light stretching shadows across the worn hardwood floors. I stood there suspended in the quiet, letting the weight of the night settle upon my shoulders, letting it seep into the cracks of my memory. The pain was still there. The sting of old wounds reopened the echo of cruel words, but mingled within, it was something else. Pride. A fierce, radiant pride that wrapped itself around my chest and made it for once easier to breathe. And with it came a lesson not taught to me by time or by age, but by the very boy I had raised. As I stood there, my thoughts drifted back through the years to countless nights where doubt had been my only company. Nights when the walls seemed to close in, when exhaustion seeped so deep into my bones that I questioned whether I was enough. Whether raising a child without a father, without the foundation society deemed essential, would leave my son irreparably fractured. I had wondered if the whispers, the side glances, the subtle cruelties of my own family would seep into his reflection of himself. If they would stain his sense of worth, defining him not by who he was, but by what he was missing. But I had been wrong. Miles was not cracked. He was carved. Every hardship we had endured, every sacrifice made in the quiet hours of the night, every moment where I chose to rise rather than retreat, each of those had chiseled away the excess, refining him into something resilient, something unshakable. He had not been diminished by our struggles. He had been shaped by them. That night, under the indifferent glow of string lights and family expectation, Miles did not seek revenge. He extended grace that did not excuse but transcended. And in offering that, he gave me a gift I had not dared to hope for. Peace. Not the fragile peace that comes from avoidance or appeasement, but the kind that roots itself in the knowledge that we had never needed their validation, that we had always been enough. Aunt Gloria never apologized. Not then. Probably not ever, but for the first time I understood that we didn't need her to. We left that reunion with our dignity intact, with a narrative no longer authored by whispers and judgment, but by strength. Miles had made certain of that. The following morning, as sunlight bled gently through the curtains, my phone chimed. A message from Cousin Lisa. Whatever Miles did, it worked. Gloria called me this morning. She didn't say anything, just cried. Never seen her like that. I read the words, their weight surprisingly light in my hand, and felt no urge to reply. There was no need. This had never been about tearing anyone down. It had been about standing firmly in who we were unapologetically, without the need for explanation or defense. Later that afternoon, I found myself sifting through a box of old photographs, the kind that still smelled faintly of dust and time. Images of Miles as a boy preserved in glossy fragments of memory. There he was proudly displaying a homemade science project in second-grade papier-mâché planets, dangling from unraveling string. Another photo of him, barely 10, helping me lug an overflowing basket of laundry up the stairs at midnight, his small arms straining but determined. And then my fingers paused on an image that made my breath catch. A picture of Miles, icing smudged across his nose, holding a cupcake as if it were a trophy, his smile so wide, so unguarded, untouched by the weight of expectation. In that smile, I saw the boy who had not yet learned what the world would try to tell him about boys without fathers. And with that memory came another unbidden but vivid. Years ago, after yet another missed birthday, I had sat beside him, offering half-hearted excuses for a man who had long since left. And Miles, in his small but certain voice, had said, "It's okay, Mom. I got what I need right here." Back then, I thought he meant me. But standing there holding that photo, I realized the truth. I had gotten what I needed too, right here in him. As the day drew to a close and the house settled into the familiar hush of evening, I allowed myself to embrace that revelation, the peace of it, the completeness of it. We did not shout to be heard. We did not demand to be seen. We simply rose. And to anyone hearing this, watching this unfold, I hope you remember you don't need the world's approval to be whole. Real grace does not originate from those who raised you. It comes from the choices you make when no one is watching. From the quiet, unwavering decision to stand tall in your truth. If this story touched you, if somewhere in these words you saw your reflection or the reflection of someone you love, I ask only this: carry this reminder with you. Share it with someone who needs it. And if you want to be part of more stories like ours, stories that don't flinch from the truth, subscribe. Stay connected. Because sometimes the quietest stories are the ones that stay with you the longest. From me and Miles, thank you for listening. Until next time.